There is a cage. You can't see its bars, you can't hear its lock turn, but you feel its confines every single day. It is built not of steel, but of silence. A silence so complete it has its own weight, its own texture. You move through the world inside this silent enclosure, watching life happen on the other side of the glass, the laughter, the touch, the simple unspoken understanding between people. It all seems so far away. You are, in a sense, a ghost in your own life, present but not felt. And in the center of this cage, there is a single object, a screen, a bottle, a needle, a ritual. It is the only thing that seems to speak your language. It is the only thing that makes the cage feel, for a few moments, not like a prison, but like a refuge. This is the hidden connection. This is where addiction and isolation meet, not as strangers, but as partners in a devastating dance, each one feeding the other in a cycle that feels impossible to break. We often trace the line backwards. The addiction came and then the isolation followed. The person drinks and pushes people away. They disappear into games and neglect their world. And that is a true path, but there is another, more insidious path. What if we have it backwards half the time? What if, more often than we dare admit, the isolation comes first? The silent cage was already there, built by grief, by anxiety, by shyness, by the slow-motion drift away from community. And the addiction simply walked in and offered a key, a counterfeit key that only tightens the lock. Think about it. What is addiction at its core? It is a relationship. A compulsive, all-consuming relationship with a substance, a behavior, a process. It promises something: relief, escape, pleasure, numbness, a sense of control in a chaotic world. Now, what is profound isolation? It is the absence of meaningful human relationships. A deep, aching loneliness that isn't necessarily about being physically alone, but about feeling fundamentally unseen, unheard, and unvalued. Into that vacuum, that desperate empty space, addiction steps in. It presents itself as the most reliable partner, the one that never says no, never judges, never asks for anything complex in return. It's always there: the bottle, the bet, the scroll, the hit, the binge. We are wired for connection. Our nervous systems are calibrated for the presence of others. We co-regulate our emotions through a glance, a touch, the tone of a loved one's voice. When that connection is severed by trauma, by grief, by social anxiety, by the slow erosion of community in a digital age, by the shame of feeling different, our system goes into a kind of starvation mode. We crave the neurochemical signatures of belonging: dopamine for reward and seeking, serotonin for mood and calm, endorphins for relief, oxytocin for bonding. And here's the cruel trick. Addiction hijacks these very pathways. It offers a counterfeit version of what we're missing, a blast of dopamine that mimics achievement, a numbing flood that mimics peace, a focused ritual that mimics purpose. So the isolated individual, perhaps without even fully understanding the depth of their loneliness, stumbles upon a solution. This thing makes the quiet bearable. It makes the self-doubt fade. It fills the hours. It becomes the answer to the question they're afraid to even ask aloud. Am I alone in this? The addiction whispers, no, I am here with you. And then the cycle tightens. Because addiction, by its nature, is a jealous partner. It demands more and more time, energy, and secrecy. The very behaviors that initially offered a respite from loneliness begin actively manufacture deeper isolation. You cancel plans to engage with the addiction. You lie to cover its tracks. You withdraw because the real world's interactions seem pale, demanding, and unsatisfying compared to the intense, predictable reward the addiction provides. The shame of the behavior itself builds walls. You feel others wouldn't understand, couldn't understand. You are now not only isolated by your original pain, but by the secret you carry.
The addiction becomes both the cause and the cure of your solitude, a closed loop of suffering. The cage now has a second layer, and the lock is on the inside.
This is why some of the most devastating addictions flourish in plain sight in our connected age. The endless, mindless scrolling through social media, it's not just a bad habit. For many, it's a compulsive attempt to feel linked to a tribe, to gauge one's worth through likes, to escape the discomfort of sitting with oneself. Yet each curated post can deepen the sense of inadequacy. Their lives are so full. Mine is here, in this room, with this screen. The technology that promised to connect us becomes the very instrument of our isolation. And then we turn to it to cure the isolation it created, a perfect invisible trap. Or consider the individual working remotely, living alone. Their main interactions transactional, delivery drivers, customer service chats. The lack of casual water cooler conversation, the absent touch of a handshake, the quiet of an empty apartment. The nervous system, understimulated in some ways and overstimulated in others, might seek a regulating rhythm. The precise click of a gambling site, the familiar burn of a drink, the repetitive cycle of a video game. These become the architecture of the day, replacing the natural rhythm of human interplay. Breaking this cycle, therefore, requires more than just removing the substance or stopping the behavior. That's like pulling a weed without digging up the root. The root is the ache of disconnection. Treatment that focuses solely on abstinence often fails because it sends the person back into the same empty room, the same silent apartment, the same fractured relationships, with the same hollow pain in their chest. Now they're just left to stare at it, raw and without their only coping mechanism. They are back in the original cage with the false key taken away. No wonder relapse is so common. Healing the hidden connection means addressing the isolation first. It means rebuilding the capacity for authentic human contact, which can feel terrifying to someone whose primary relationship has been with a predictable, inanimate object or process. It's slow, patient work. It's about finding safe connection, sometimes starting with just one person, a therapist, a support group member who says, "Me too." It's about learning to tolerate the vulnerability of being seen, not by a screen, but by another human being with their own flaws and fears. It is about realizing the cage door was never actually locked from the outside. It was just stuck from disuse. It's about replacing the counterfeit connection with a real one, however small. A conversation without a screen between you, a shared meal, a walk where you notice the world outside your head. Joining a group, not online, but in person, where the shared interest is just an excuse to be in a room with other breathing, laughing, struggling people. These acts are not trivial. They are neurobiological medicine. Each genuine, awkward, authentic moment of connection starts to repair the pathways that addiction hijacked. It reminds the nervous system, you are not alone. You belong to the human race. The path out is not to suddenly become a social butterfly. It is about finding the smallest, most manageable thread of human connection and following it. This begins with a new understanding that the urge to reach for the addiction is often a signal, a flare sent up from a place of unmet human need, a need to be soothed, to feel seen, to escape a pain that feels too vast to name. The transformative question then becomes, can I answer this need, even in the tiniest way, through a human channel? Not with a grand gesture, but with a quiet action. A text that says, today was hard. Attending a meeting and just listening to another voice. Making eye contact and holding it for a second longer. These are not small things. They are acts of neurobiological repair, reminding a nervous system conditioned for isolation that it is safe to belong. This work is crucial because of the hidden engine of the struggle. Silence doesn't always mean peace.
Sometimes it is the loudest, most chaotic place a person can live. And in that quiet, a devastating connection takes root. Addiction and isolation are not separate problems. They are twin forces in a closed loop. One pulls a person inward, and the other quietly locks the door behind them. This isolation is not always physical. You can be surrounded by people and feel utterly alone. We are wired for connection. It is our psychological oxygen. When that connection weakens through grief, anxiety, shame, or the fragmented pace of modern life, the system panics. It seeks regulation, relief, anything to quiet the ache of disconnection. Addiction often steps into this void, not as a wish for destruction, but as a misguided rescue mission. It is fundamentally a flawed form of pain management. But the remedy is a poison. The relief is counterfeit, and the cost compounds. Here, the loop tightens. Isolation fuels the need for the addiction, and the addiction, in turn, manufactures deeper isolation. It demands secrecy, breeds shame, and makes authentic interaction feel exhausting and unrewarding. You can become split in two, divided between the part that longs for freedom and the part that is terrified of facing the silent cage without its only companion. The brain adapts to this artificial partnership, making the world seem dull and the addictive behavior seem essential. This is why willpower alone so often fails. The battle isn't just against a substance or a behavior, it's against a profound physiological state of disconnection. Therefore, breaking the cycle doesn't start with punishment or sheer grit. It begins with that single, fragile thread of safe, non-judgmental connection, a crack in the wall. This is the core truth that changes everything. The opposite of addiction is not simply sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection, the very thing it mimicked and then systematically destroyed. Healing, then, is the slow and patient process of replacing the counterfeit with the real. It is learning to sit in the quiet of that inner cage and instead of instantly reaching for the thing that promises to fill it, discovering that the quiet itself is not the enemy. It is just quiet. And from that stillness, you can begin to hear the faint, real sounds of a world waiting for you, imperfect, beautiful, and alive. Connection restores what isolation stole: perspective, emotional balance, the quiet belief that change is possible. It writes a new story, not a story of separation, but a story of return. You remember that you are part of something larger than your own private struggle. The isolation built the cage, but connection, in all its fragile human forms, is the key that was in your pocket all along. You simply forgot for a while how to use it. The first step is not to break out alone. It is to reach out. If this perspective resonated with you, or you know someone who needs to hear it, consider passing it on. Like this video and subscribe to Better You Daily. Together, we can break the silence.